are houses in Silicon Valley and in the Bay Area in such demand?
They're in demand, but we don't have the supply. There are very few houses on the market. Because of those 8% mortgage rates, not only are potential buyers nervous about jumping in with that monthly payment they would face, but sellers are nervous about selling because no matter where they go, they'd have an 8% mortgage, and they're probably sitting on something around 3% right now.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, November 3rd installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in Silicon Valley. My name is Mike Malone. I'm here with special contributor Scott Budman of NBC Bay Area. Our producer is Jordan Henderson. Our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove. And our host is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. And if this is an unusual background, we're not in my library anymore. We're at our new host, Santa Clara University. We'll slick this up here quite a bit. So you don't have to, this was going to be a bare wall, but I found a painting. So next week, look for something better. Anyway, hey, Scott, you got a busy day. And I guess you're monitoring the Sam Bankman-Fried trial.
Yeah, that has wrapped up closing. Yeah, closing statements are done. The jury now has his fate in their hands as of this is Thursday. And we'll see if it, from what I understand, Friday has no deliberations in the court. So they either decide late Thursday evening or it moves till Monday. But right now, the jury is deliberating as we speak.
Any bets? You and your fellow TV journalists, are you putting any money down on this one?
You know, it's hard to see him not get jail time simply because of the overwhelming evidence. Not only co-workers, fellow FTX executives turning against him, but as we often see now in these kind of alleged financial fraud cases, lots of emails and texts back and forth saying, oh, hey, let's move the money here type things. And so it looks bad for SBF. And the defense was largely as expected, saying, well, he's a young guy. He didn't know what he was doing. I mean, he's 31 years old and he had billions of dollars to move around. And it looks like some of it may have very well been moved illegally. And I believe there are 7 charges of fraud, and he faces as much as, 100 years, whatever, life in prison.
Yeah, I mean, the prosecution and the defense had very different arguments. I mean, different cases, different scenarios, a different person being presented. The prosecution, it was like, he's a crime lord con man. And the defense was, interestingly, for a 31-year-old man. There's a lot of people in the world that are 31 years old and already have 2 kids and been married for a decade. But, excuse me, he's a young idiot defense.
Right.
And he screwed up, which reminds me of, excuse me, Theranos. It was, she didn't know what she was doing. She was a true believer. She really cared. And it sounds like they tried the same thing this time. It didn't work last time. It's hard to believe it'll work this time.
Yeah, we'll keep you posted. It would be surprising, just given the sentiment of where this thing ends up.
Hang on. Like I said, this is the first time in this room, and I think the motion sensor just went off. Let's keep talking, though. Hang on. I'm sorry. There we go. Okay, I'm just going to have to keep tennis balls next to me and throw them at the lights. Sorry about that. We're making it up as we go, folks. Okay, the first new Beatle record in 20 years just dropped today, now and then. It was released early this morning, California time. The surviving Beatles tried to take an old John Lennon cassette and turn it into music in 1995, I believe, and it was just too coarse of a recording. It had static and machine noise, and the piano was too loud and all of that. They tried again a few years later. I guess they tried in the 70s. They tried again in the late 90s before George Harrison's death. And Harrison said, it's junk. We can't do it, and walked away. So now the world has changed. And suddenly we have this thing released. It's a pretty good Beatles song, sung by John Lennon, clear as a bell. And it's all due to, we can thank Peter Jackson with his work on the Get Back documentary. It's well done. It's well constructed. I mean, they put the tracks down and they use AI to pull up Lennon's voice. Okay. Ironically, the same day, there's a conference going on at Bletchley Park among government officials from around the world, figuring out how they can control AI to keep it from doing destructive things. I found that ironic because we literally have a new Beatles song adding to the entertainment of the world thanks to AI. And simultaneously, governments are getting together to figure out how to suppress AI or at least control it. Thoughts? I mean, is this a two-edged sword like all technologies? Or is this, this is actually a fundamental good that we're going to figure out how to suppress to keep it from giving us all the things it could?
No, I think it's a two-edged sword. I think it can be used for good. I think it can be used for terrible. I mean, these are machine learning from people, and people do good and people do terrible things. And I think the machines will learn. I was listening to the Beatles song myself. I think it's beautiful. It's wistful. It's as someone who had the Beatles passed down to me from my parents, and then I passed down the Beatles to my kids. The Beatles are one of those enduring bands whose sound is just timeless. And this is a song that sounds as if they kept on going much longer and were talking about, being older. And it's a beautiful thing. The idea behind it, I'm not a big fan of. I like live music. I like real things. I wasn't a fan of the hologram that had Tupac. I was, a huge Tupac fan, but I don't want to bring him back in a way that feels, I don't know, commercial. And this feels commercial too, but it is interesting to see the AI used, that machines can learn what they couldn't before, which is how to separate voices and to recognize John Lennon's voice from literally beyond. I mean, it's kind of spooky, but it's also, again, very impressive and wistful to hear.
You feel like you're in the Dakota right there next to him playing on the piano.
Right. Very much so. And so, again, I'm not a big fan of this trend. I like to hear music being done by, living musicians, right, or listen to what they did back when they were alive. But this is an interesting use of AI. At the same time, yeah, it's important to, getting back to that conference, to talk about guardrails. Just last week, a whole lot of people talking about the White House and the AI and the summit and Joe Biden's sort of executive order and his EO on AI and the need for these guardrails and these concerns, because after all, it is a case of machines mimicking humans, and we know that can be good or bad.
Well, I have to say, for somebody who actually saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan and went to school the next day and realized that the world had completely changed, it's kind of amazing to be on Social Security and still hearing a brand new Beatles song. I guess this is it. McCartney left it a little open. There might be something else, but it's essentially, this is the last Beatle album. They don't have George Harrison laying down guitar tracks for anything else. So this is it. An amazing run, a real testament.
Right. And I mean, I was amazed even how many reissues there were of the already existing material. And then you'd get into, you mentioned what Peter Jackson did, but also just the box sets of original demos and just their creative process writ large and all of that. Because again, that wasn't done by machines. That was finding these incredible archives of this incredible band. And that was all fascinating. And the idea that of all groups, the Beatles that, broke up in the 60s, somehow being the vanguards of this brand new technology is just strange and amazing at the same time.
Yeah, they broke up when I was a freshman in high school. Now I'm pushing 70 years old. What does that tell you?
They had a long run, even.
A long and winding road.
Very good.
The semiconductor industry is all of a sudden showing signs of a rebound. The prices of memory have been climbing recently, and memory is always the leading indicator for the chip world and then for the rest of the electronics world. And it's believed that the market could actually, or it just has crossed $600 billion for the very first time. That's an amazing milestone for an industry that we think of as being troubled still. You think this is the payoff for Washington, the Biden administration, putting all that money into domestic fabs? Are we already starting to see the payoff? I thought that was going to take a little longer.
That's interesting. It may be a little bit of that, but I think it's something that you have talked about a lot in the past, which is that semiconductors have always been sort of the base of the tech industry. And sometimes that gets recognized and sometimes it doesn't, but it's always there. Look at the earnings just over the last 24 hours. A really wide berth of earnings from companies showing that consumers are buying and they're buying tech. Companies are buying tech. They're using tech both for growth, but even for efficiency, because some companies are cutting back. But semiconductors are just really front and center. And so I'm not surprised to see, the AMDs soaring, the Intels treading water, but a little more successfully than they were before. And of course, the NVIDIA is becoming, among the most valuable trillion-dollar companies in the world. You're just seeing this really interesting time in semiconductors where they are so key to everything going on in the economy.
So what are consumers buying? I mean, it seems to be driven by consumer demand. Consumers are keeping the economy afloat. But where are the hot products, the brand new products that everybody's buying? I mean, it's just new generation computers, new generation of games and platforms, new generation of phones. I mean, I don't see that breakthrough product that just sets the entire industry on fire and raises demand for semiconductors.
Oh, but maybe you don't need a breakthrough product. I mean, all of those things you've mentioned have been redone and have new iterations. And let's not forget the cars. For a while, it was just the sort of high-end EVs that used a lot of chips, but chips are everywhere in cars now. They're all pretty much rolling smartphones. And I think no matter what kind of device you're buying these days, it is built on a floor of chips.
I have a friend, Jason Franks, and his truck caught on fire and managed to put it out. And he said, thank God the engine computer still worked. The chip was actually more valuable than the rest of the truck. So he's going to be able to rebuild. I mean, that says something about the world we live in today. Even cars are basically drivable microprocessors.
I agree. And sorry about his truck, but that's an interesting point. And yeah, that says a lot right there.
Well, but bond rates are have at the highest level in 16 years. And that usually is a sign that the economy is going to slow down, the stock market is going to drop. And yet we seem to have high bond rates and a lively market and strong consumer demand and inflation. How does this work? I mean, it seems to violate everything I ever learned in an economics textbook.
Yeah, I'm not sure because those are for smarter brains than mine. But what I have noticed, just really paying close attention here in Silicon Valley, is, everybody notices inflation every time we go to the grocery store, not to mention buying some of those high-end devices and cars we were just talking about. Inflation is real. It may have slowed a bit, but it's been with us a long time. Along with that comes higher interest rates that the Fed are putting on. And we've talked about how that has boosted mortgage rates, which means our prices for homes here in Silicon Valley are higher than ever as well. I think the one thing that has defied the expectation of a much slower economy because of all this inflation is that most people still have jobs. We have seen some flurries of layoffs, especially in the tech sector. But even in Silicon Valley, the unemployment rate is something like 3%. I mean, really, really low. And over the entire country, the unemployment rate is really low. And so when you have a job, it seems you're willing to spend some money. And you look at what some of the retailers are saying as we head into the holiday season, they expect a fairly strong holiday season. Who would imagine that given the inflationary times? And yet it seems to be that People know if they spend, they're going to have to spend more, but perhaps because they're employed, they're willing to spend more.
Okay, well, I saw you on the set this week talking about real estate. Amazingly, I mean, we're already coming out of what we thought was going to be a fairly long-term real estate recession in the Valley. Housing prices were down like 10%, and houses were sitting, waiting, without buyers. It's all gone. It's all evaporated. We're now housing prices, which were insane 6 months ago or a year ago, we're back to insanity again. Why is that? With these incredibly high mortgage rates, why are houses in Silicon Valley and in the Bay Area in such demand?
They're in demand, but we don't have the supply. There are very few houses on the market. Because of those 8% mortgage rates, not only are potential buyers nervous about jumping in with that monthly payment they would face, but sellers are nervous about selling because no matter where they go, they'd have an 8% mortgage and they're probably sitting on something around 3% right now. And that's a big difference, as we've since learned. So very little inventory on the market. When houses do come on the market, and we've seen this in the high-end neighborhoods, I've seen this in my neighborhood, which is not high-end, but all of a sudden you get whatever few buyers they are converging. And real estate agents tell me they're seeing multiple offers on homes whenever they go on sale in the Bay Area. And in Silicon Valley, you think about some of these tech companies are still doing pretty well, and others are saying, come on back to work. So you have a workforce that has those stock options to pay, and they're saying, okay, I want to settle here because it's time to get back to the office. And sort of that combination, I think, would be moving a lot of buyers in, but there's just not enough selling. And so the houses that do go on the market are priced at record highs right now.
Is there enough income around here right now that they're not frightened by those mortgage rates?
Many people are frightened by those mortgage rates, but yeah, there's enough income around. I mean, in this area, it seems like there's always enough income around.
Okay, well, it's going to be interesting because, traditionally, I was told this years ago, every decade in this area, the first few years suffer a 10% downturn in real estate prices, and the second half of the decade experiences continuous growth to new record highs. And it looks like we're kind of following that one again. It remains to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, housing is almost hard to link to the rest of the economy here because it's so uniquely strange and right now all but paralyzed.
Yeah. Okay, finally, get you off on your stories. Long talk about real estate. That those Valley billionaires that managed to buy up all that land in the North Bay for their techno-utopian village that they wanted to build. I kept in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, why did those farmers up there decide to sell after all these years? It seemed to come out of the blue. And I got a note from Rich Karlgaard. We all know Rich, a publisher of Forbes, an author, and he found a story and pointed out that those farmers are suing the development company for what they claim is unfair and strong-arm tactics. And in return, the company is suing the farmers for saying they inflated the value of their land. It's interesting. It's got some very interesting players involved in all of this. I mean, guys we know, Mike Moritz, the venture capitalist, Reid Hoffman, the VC from LinkedIn, and Mark Andreessen, among others, guys who come up all the time. They seem to have gotten together behind this development company and did the usual billionaire buying land thing, which is to quietly go in and acquire pieces without really representing who the actual buyer is. Who has a leg to stand on in this? Do we even know yet?
I don't know. I mean, from what I understand, the land has been bought, it's owned, it's going to be developed. I don't know enough about the law to know if these people who sold their land can then turn around and sue because of the pricing or whatever. I just don't know. I think this takes a while to play out, but if you think about it, it got hot in the news but even after it had been going on for a long time, sort of under all of our radars. And, you know, I don't know. I don't know that this turns out to be a utopia so much as some much needed housing in the Bay Area that really needs it. But is it going to be priced well enough to really make a difference? I just don't know.
I predict you're going to be in front of a courthouse at 6 a.m. in a few months here. Meta Facebook, they just reached an agreement with the EU to stop running ads to European teenagers and try to sell the kids on subscription. I'm not sure that's going to work. The danger of freeware is it's pretty hard to go back to the old pricing model. It's going to work. You think the EU is, essentially crippled Facebook in Europe?
I mean, it's hard to say that Facebook can be crippled, period. It's just so gigantic. But that said, the EU has powers that apparently we don't, or at least they use powers that we don't. And they really crack down on social media. And so they're always a test case to watch, but we don't seem to emulate them all that much. So I can see something like that cracking down in the EU that we here just wouldn't be able to do. And part of it is because, we like our freeware. And part of it is just that the EU operates on a different level when it comes to regulating tech companies than we do.
Well, I was going to ask you then if you thought it would happen here, but it would take a lot.
Right.
Especially the kind of money that Zuckerberg burns in DC on lobbyists.
Well, and look at what his sort of, rival Elon Musk is trying to do with Twitter, trying to eventually get to the point where it's a subscription thing. And, whenever I put on my Twitter, hey, are you guys ready for a subscription? It's pretty much 1 million to 0. I mean, nobody wants to pay for it. And I think it's because you're right. People get used to freeware and, they're willing to pay for cable television or, the premium channels or subscribe to things. But for social media, I just don't know. Maybe it's too young of an industry and we just haven't experienced the idea of, okay, I'll pay for TikTok, but not Facebook. I'll pay for Twitter, but on Instagram, who knows?
Yeah. Freeware, I think, is the most brilliant and most insidious monetary technique of our time. Because once you get on that train, you're not going to get on the one you have to pay a ticket on.
I mean, watch Mad Men. Those advertisers know a little something, apparently.
Okay, and finally, this is in the where are they now category. For 2 years, you and I covered WeWork every week, and the ups and downs, worth $47 billion, then worth almost nothing, then shutting everything down. Well, amazingly, it's about to file for bankruptcy. Didn't they do this before? I seem to remember that at some point there was a bankruptcy or some kind of chapter 11 or 12. And is this actually the end, or is WeWork's the Dracula of American startups? It just keeps coming back, in a slightly different form.
I mean, it may, because remember, WeWork already exists in different forms, just not in highly capitalized, highly funded, publicly traded real estate. It just doesn't exist other than in the original, view of Adam Neumann and SoftBank. And then, that one went kaput. And then some new people took it over, took it public. But look, you're talking about a company that went in fairly short order from $47 billion in value to where it sits today, $59 million. That's a huge drop. And that just showed that this wasn't meant to be on a big scale. It wasn't meant to be publicly traded. And
there go my lights again. Hang on.
It is lights out for WeWork, I believe, as well.
You know what? We'll finish it right there. Thanks, everybody. You know where to find us. And have a great weekend. And I think we changed our clocks. I think I've already changed my clocks back in this room. So we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.